Alliance contracting works, as in it works, as opposed to the works. And I'm going to talk to you about where it has worked here in Ireland. And it has worked for a very strange reason, not because we set out to try something new, but because we had a fire at our feet and we had to deliver something. We had to do it in a different way. So, just go through this. The first thing I would say is that construction generally has this idea, or we have this idea in construction, that it's pulling itself apart. I saw a slide last week of a number of people in a boat, and the people at the front were rowing in one direction and the people in the back were rowing in the other direction. But again, we have this with the tug of war, that it seems to be we're pulling in different directions. And Wolfgang Breyer, who was mentioned by David Mosey earlier from Germany, has described, he's a legal person in Germany, he has described the contract signing as the declaration of war between the client and the contractor. And he said it often starts like that and it doesn't improve. And he said that's the environment that we then try to deliver our infrastructure within. So it's not a great place to start. And part of the problem about this is that we concentrate on the contractual process rather than on the product itself. So we are always going through why we have to do things in a certain way rather than what we're producing. And I had a 30-minute discussion yesterday with somebody from a government procurement agency who I won't name. It was the NDFA, who spent quite a bit of time talking about something that we couldn't do from the point of view of risk. And yet, when we looked at the issue that we were trying to solve, there was no risk. It's just they didn't want to do it because the process involved going through looking at all this risk and trying to analyse what the risk was. But yet when you looked at it, it was really a bag of smoke and there was nothing in there. There is a worldwide movement towards collaboration. You've seen this in America where you've got IPD, you've seen it in Australia, you see it in Canada, you've seen it with the work that David Mosey has done in the UK, you're seeing it now with the FAC1 being rolled out across Europe and across other parts of the world as well. And there are other things that are causing us to do this, not just the fact that people are doing contracts in a different way. There are things that are forcing us to do this, such as BIM. And we are in a changing world, and we've got to work with that. But collaboration requires everybody to pull on the same end of the rope, such as the way it is here, to put the effort into achieving agreed objectives and to making sure that nobody loses in this, that everybody gains as much as we possibly can. But in order to build the trust in that, you have to make sure that everybody is keeping score. Now, I'm going to talk to you about a case study that we had, which we completed in 2014. And it's one which we did once, and we never did it again. And I think that's a shame. Because when you look at David Mosey's slide earlier on, 1997, with all of the problems that exist in industry, unfortunately they're still there. CitA is here 20 years now, 20 years since last September. And it has done great work in trying to bring us on to a new way of doing things, but the problems are still there. What we have to do is we have to stop talking about it. We have to move on. We have to do things differently. Otherwise, some of you, I won't be here in 20 years' time. I'll be well retired. But some people will be back here in this room and saying, 20 years ago we said we were going to do something and we didn't do it. So there is no better time than now. There's no right time to do anything other than right now, because it's the only time we can do anything. And I'm just going to talk to you about this SIPR package. And I'm going to explain about how it worked. And another thing that came up last week in the conversations we had while I was over in London is that we often think of projects and say, do we want them at a lower expense? Do we want them to be high quality? And do we want them to be done on time? So, to break that down, cheap, good and fast is another way of looking at it. But in most cases, if you have good and cheap, it won't be fast. If you have fast and good, it won't be cheap. And if it's cheap and fast, it certainly won't be good. But what we tried to do with this particular project is we tried to get all three of them together. We had a major issue which we had to deal with in Grangegorman. We were given the site, given 65 acres for what was DIT at the time, now the Technological University of Dublin. But we were told if we didn't have 1,000 students there by 2014, the end of 2014, we had to give it back. Very few people actually were aware of that condition. But we had to get the students there. And if you're going to bring students to a new campus, you have to bring them there in September. You can't bring them there later on because it's just too disruptive on their studies. So we had to finish the first phase of this project by September 2014, or the entire campus project was going to fall. So talk about having the fire to your feet. We really had in that case. So we had to do this. But just to give you a small bit of background for those of you who don't know what DIT was at the time, or TU Dublin City Centre campuses as it's called now, it's based in several different places all around the city, or was based in several places around the city. In 2011 there were 39 different addresses in the city centre that had DIT over the door. And that meant that we couldn't coordinate anything across how we did our business. We couldn't get the synergies that we needed from, say for example, you have architects studying in the same building as engineers. Eventually what will happen is you will get the design of the best auditoriums in the world if you have something like that. But if they're on opposite sides of the city, they might as well be on opposite sides of the world. Similarly, there were scientists in Kevin Street and engineers in Bolton Street. And the synergies that you could get between the two, you couldn't get them because you had these people in the wrong place. And that was also, we also looked at the fact that in each of these buildings we had an accounts department, we had an exams department. Every time we opened a door we needed a security person to open it. We had different bills for electricity and telecoms and insurance and all types of things, which meant that the fragmentation across the organisation was adding enormous cost, and that was coming down to us as cost per student. And we were finding that our costs per student were higher than any other third level education institute in the country. We had to reduce those, and the only way we could do that is bring them all to one place. The facts and figures around Grangegorman, most of you will know the Dundrum Shopping Centre. It's approximately 80,000 square metres of floor space, and Grangegorman is almost 5 times that in floor space. Of that, the TU Dublin portion is 270,000, of which approximately 140,000 of that is learning space. The remainder would be for sports, for student accommodation, for other support facilities that we need. The final on-campus population will be approximately 25,000 people in an area of 63 acres, 30 hectares. That's approximately 5,000 more than the town of Wexford, or Athlone, or Sligo, or Mullingar, or all these other big towns that you all know about. You can imagine putting those into 65 acres. And all of that within a kilometre of the city centre of Dublin, which is astonishing that it survived the boom and wasn't covered with other development. So that's the 380,000 square metres, and then the slide there also shows all the other things that need to happen. But you see there's a primary school in there, there's community and residential health facilities, there's an industry innovation park. And these were all extra things that were put in there because some things stayed with the HSE and some things had to stay with the Department of Education. And if you look at the way in which this is done here, it's divided into a number of areas. Everything above that line is not TU Dublin. The middle bit is education, and the bit on the bottom is education support. So it's very well laid out with this master plan, which was agreed back in 2008. The overall cost is going to be approximately €1.5 billion, and that's for everything that's there, including the health facilities. And it will be.
Sorry, we need to switch.
Okay. Okay. Right. Okay. Right. That's much better. It will be delivered sometime in the mid-2020s, but it depends on what you describe as the mid-2020s. Our current, our president, who took over, David Fitzgerald, who took over in January, is going around telling everybody that Bolton Street, which is the last big block, will move in September 2025. And that we are now feeling the heat on our feet again, because the flames have been brought closer to us. But that's a big challenge for us, and we've got to try to meet that. Just to give an idea of where that is, right down in the corner, right down here, you see, this is Bolton Street. So it's right beside the city centre, and to walk now from the middle of the campus, from the clock tower in the campus down to Bolton Street is 7 or 8 minutes, depending on how fast you can walk, if you walk through King's Ends. So it really is a city centre site, and it's, as I said, it's amazing that it has survived as long as it has. as a brownfield site. So the SIPR works package, what exactly was it? Well, what we had to do when we were building out the entire campus, we looked at the overall size, the overall number of places we would build on this, and there were 30 building plots across the 73 acres, or 72 acres when you take into account the HSE buildings as well. And each one of these had to be fed by a district heating system, by systems which would carry the telecoms, the water, the gas, the sewers, everything to those particular building plots. So in doing this, a package was put together which would do all of this infrastructure work, which was approximately 26 million euro, and involved a huge amount of work, 140 kilometres of ducting and utility services runs. Again, to put that in perspective, if you were to lay that on the M50, it would go up and down 3 times. So it's an enormous length of stuff that had to go in there. Over 1,000 manholes had to go in there. 800 metres of 600 millimetre diameter storm sewer had to be put in place from the site right down to Smithfield. And that had to be done through busy Dublin streets, and that was included as part of the project as well. 9,000 square metres of paving and 2,500 cubic metres of an attenuation tank to capture the water from the hard areas, so that it wouldn't overload the sewers at a time when you would get large floods. So all of this had to be done between November 2013 and August 2014, because we needed the students on site on the 1st of September. So how are we going to do this? That just gives you an idea of the complexity under one part of the site. And it was just a graphic that was put together to show all of the services which would go under what's called Ivy Avenue. Again, this is more of the energy distribution to show where the energy centre will go. You see future energy centre there. That energy centre is actually going to open for business next week. So we will have our district heating system ready to run. We'll be putting water in the pipes next week and commissioning it. And that will bring the district heating to all of the various different building plots. But also we had to work out how do the telecoms come in? Where do we get our internet connections? Where do we have our substations for power? And all of that was worked out so that we have this plug and play now. You start in a particular site, a particular building plot. Everything you need is right beside you. So we don't have to go digging it up all the way back to the road in order to connect up to everything. The main people who were involved, the Grange Gorman Development Agency was the organisation in charge of delivering the project. So they were overseeing the design, they were making sure that we got through procurement, they were making sure that we managed the project and closed out the project at the end. The architects, MRY, the lead engineering organisation was O'Connor Sutton Cronin, the local architect DMOD, and so on with the landscape architect. The contractor was Road Bridge, and the end users, these were just the ones that were on the site, which were ourselves, TU Dublin, HSE, the Department of Education and Skills, who have a primary school on the site, but also all of the local people who we also see as stakeholders who were involved in this. So, in order to get this to work, we realised that we have a certain amount of money, we have a limited amount of time, and we have a huge deadline on the 1st of September that has to be met. It's not negotiable. We just can't do anything else. So Michael Hand, who was the GDA CEO at the time, brought together all of the people who were involved in the project at a management level, and all their supervisors right down to their site foreman. And he knew most of the principles of he worked with the contractors before, he had worked with O'Connor Sutton Cronin before, he had worked with the architects before, and he used the power of his own personality to bring these people together and say, we need to get this done, but we cannot do this if we fight with each other. We can only do this if we collaborate. And we were going to be using the Public Works contract, which is not a contract which people would say promotes collaboration, but we still had to do it. But all the people who were required to make decisions were invited to a meeting in Grange Gorman, and everybody publicly agreed to project goals and to collaboration. And in order to do this, what we did was we took the bill of quantities and we isolated out the overheads and profit as a sum rather than as a percentage. and said, we will guarantee the contractor that sum if you finish on time and within budget, regardless of how low you bring the cost. If you bring the cost down, that money is reinvested in the project, but then you will have a set percentage of overheads and profit, which again we will agree as a sum, and you will be guaranteed that amount, and you can then make more money as a result of collaborating. All of the decision makers were based on the site. So nobody had to ring somebody up and arrange a meeting or anything else. You could literally get up from your desk, walk down to the end of the corridor and talk to the person who could make a decision. And those people could make a decision there and then. And were given the authority and responsibility to make those decisions. And they did. As I said, the project objectives were publicly agreed. Everybody stood up and said, yes, we will do this. So it wasn't a case of somebody saying, well, that's all very well, but when I bring that back to my contracts manager or my managing director, then I'm going to get a different view. The managing director was on the podium with Michael Hand and said, we will do this. And we are giving you, our employees, the authority to do this. And as I said, the gain sharing was worked out in relation to how the profits and overheads were looked at. The processes were agreed for dealing with this, and problem-solving systems were also agreed. In other words, if I had an issue around how I was trying to get something done on a particular part of the site, and I couldn't get it resolved, and I was dealing with somebody else, rather than fight with them, we would escalate it to the level that could solve it, and then we'd get on with dealing with the stuff we could deal with. And that meant that everybody was constantly working on what they could be doing, rather than fighting about what somebody else should be doing. If you just look at the two photographs there, one was before the project, the other one was after the project. So I know one is a bit further away, but you can see that there's quite a change in the area, and if you look at it now, it's even more so. But there between November 2013 and November 2014, you can see a radical change around the area just at the entrance to the project. You can also see where another project started up in the background there, which is the Greenway Hub project, which was not included in the original site infrastructure and public ground project, but again was a very successful project on the site. So 2 weeks before completion, it looked a bit like a bomb hit it, but 8 o'clock the morning of the 1st of September 2014, that was the scene, and that's when that photograph was taken. I was told the last brick was laid just after 7 o'clock that morning. The contractors actually worked all weekend to get it finished. But it was done, and it was done within budget, and it worked. So when you looked at the graphic on the left there is actually from the master plan in 2008. The one on the right is the photograph that was taken in, I think it was 2015, early 2015. So the vision versus the reality matched up really, really well. So the outcome was we first of all had to hit the power on target date, which was in late May in 2014. So we hit that on time. We achieved the opening and got 1,000 students there by the 1st of September. The quality was never compromised. And this was an issue which Michael Hand always said, it's as easy to design for good quality, it's as easy to do good design as it is to do bad design. And in fact, if you do good design, it ends up being cheaper. The contractor achieved their financial targets, and everybody emerged from this with their professional reputations very much intact, because they ended up getting an award for this. The International Construction Project Management Association has an award every year for alliance contracting, and this one won the award in 2015, which is the only one that has ever been won in Ireland. But there were problems, because once we got by 2014, that was phase one of the contract, the focus now changed. The flames were no longer at our feet, so therefore it wasn't as urgent to continue to finish out phase two of the project in the same way. And it became more problematic. There were problems that the contractor had on other sites, which suddenly became imported into our site. And we ended up actually going to court. Well, we ended up in arbitration, which was astonishing when you consider that we actually achieved so much in phase one of the contract, and the same people involved in phase 2 of the contract saw it all fall apart. So, what do we learn from that? Well, let's concentrate on what we did right for a start. The first thing is the right people were selected. The people who were on the site were positive. They always wanted to get the job done. They always wanted to ensure that any problems that were there would be escalated to the right level. The culture in all of the organisations that were there was right, and that was absolutely crucial. Everybody bought into the project goals, and they were stated publicly, so that nobody was under any illusions about the fact that their directors, their managing directors, their contracts managers and whatever, were fully 100% bought into this. So they had the authority to go and do what they were being asked to do. Trust was built from that meeting from day one. And the problem-solving mechanisms that were put in place worked. Everybody pulled together rather than pulled apart. So if you look back at the very first slide again, we were all pulling on the same end of the rope, and it all worked. But the difficulty that we have from this was that we didn't learn. And there needs to be a contract that will keep the collaboration going. And this is why I would say FAC1 is something that we really should be looking at. And David was talking earlier about pipelines of projects and having pipelines of work. And in Grangegorman in particular, I know I keep talking to my own colleagues about it in Grangegorman, we have to actually do this because we have a pipeline of work that will run for the next at least 7 or 8 years. So in conclusion, what I would say is that collaboration is achievable, but it requires this formal structure. And in what David has shown you in his presentation, there are formal structures available. And I think what we need to do in Ireland is to look at the fact that 20 years ago we had problems. Today we have problems. And unless we actually bring some sort of formal structure in on top of what we're doing, in 20 years' time, we'll continue to have the same problems. Thank you.